So let's talk about logging inside Wappler. The current logging options are pretty limited. You can enable debug mode, which will show you everything that happens inside Server Connect. It's first off, it slows down your application and it exposes secrets. You can see that here I have an env variable set, my secret, and yeah, I can see that in here, which shouldn't be the case inside production. Out of that, it can expose database credentials and other things to the front end depending on where you store them. So be careful to never enable that inside production. You can use it locally to debug certain workflows. Then out of that, we have an extension called run.js, which is freely available, and inside there you can basically do a console log and console log whatever, forward the console, my log, call that workflow, and now it logged the whatever value here. That's good and quite easy to use, but you need to create a new run.js function whenever you want to log something. It's not pretty printed, and you can basically only forward it to the console here, which then forwards to your std out on the server. Out of that, you don't have any piping for console logs, so you can't send them anywhere else, you can't write them to a file, and whenever you want to redact sensitive info, if I would have my secret in here, you would need to do that manually. I built an extension to make that easier, and it's called Advanced Wappler Logger. I will link that in the description, the GitHub repo. It has a README with all the installation instructions, and that's it. So you basically just add the action, give it a name, log, and then you can add a log message. Let's say this is my first log. You give it a log level, info for example, and message details can be any object. I will leave that empty for now. Disable debug mode and start my server again and run that workflow. And we can see nothing is here. That's because you need to enable some env variables depending on where you want to send your logs. The easiest method, and you can send your log to multiple locations, is to, if you want to develop locally or just need pretty printed console log, is to enable pretty log, set the env to enabled, restart your server to reload the env variables, and then run that server action again. And there we can see our pretty printed log. It's an info log. Let's add another one, maybe an error. And we can see the error message here. There's also a message details object, which can take any object. So for example, I have an API request here. All that does, it uses a free catfact API, and we can just put the complete object into the log if we want to do that. Let's put it in here, into our error, load the log again, and now we can see the full object in the details. Another thing we can do is in production, for example, we want to not log everything. Because that becomes pretty unreadable and you don't really want to have debug enabled. So we can, for example, only watch everything that's 1 and above. Start the app again, load our workflow, and then we only have our error message because that's an info log, so we didn't want to show it if that would be production. Let's change that back to show everything. Or we can just log everything from on debug. Next we can add a log environment. That becomes more important later. What can we do with that? First off, it's way faster. It uses Pino, which is async, while console log is usually not async. So yeah, you can write logs very, very fast. You can enable file logging. Let's get Visual Studio Code here. I have a log folder. I will delete that. And enable file logging. It's also just an env variable, log file path, and then you give the folder path relative to your root directory. So that would be the log folder in my case. I save that, go back to Wappler, reload the server. And I have a buffer enabled as well that has a default value. I will show you that later, but you can control how many lines of log you want to get before you write to the file, which increases the speed as well because you don't write to the file that frequently that way. So yeah, let's load our server action again a couple of times. Write some logs, and you can see we have multi-transport, so we can still show the pretty print and write to the file at the same time. Let's get Visual Studio Code back. Now my log folder is here, and I have my log file. And that's not pretty printed because you might want to parse it later. It has the details object, as you can see here, and the severity, and all these things. Another option we have is we can log, for example, to Logtail. Logtail is a log aggregator. You need a secret from them. So for that, you just go to logtail.com. There you need to click on connect source. It's a JavaScript project. My project, create the source. That will generate the token for you. You copy that, go to your env again, and that's your Logtail token. So we save that, reload the application, start it again, run our workflow a bunch of times to generate some logs. And now inside Logtail, we can go to Lifetail. And here are our logs. And they have all the details in there. We send the our error message, has a details object that's in here. And yeah, basically all the data, including the log level. It's very practical because it lets you create custom views. For example, if you only want to track error logs, and then you can create alerts so that you get notified if there are too many errors happening on your production instance. Then another option that's included, and right now we're writing to a file, we're sending the logs to Logtail. You usually wouldn't want to do all of that, and we have pretty log enabled for our console. Then we have the log environment, which we can set to local, and on production you could set that to production, for example. Let's restart the server, generate a few logs. And jump back to the live tailing. And the logs are coming in right now. There we have the log level, and we have the log environment as well. The log environment lets you later on filter logs inside Logtail, for example. because you can decide which view should show which environment, and then you can, for example, only show errors that happen in production. Let's disable file logging for now because we don't need that. Or we need that later actually. Another thing that's integrated is Sentry. Most of you might know Sentry actually. You can track all your errors in your application with it. That's natively included as well. And yeah, we can send logs concurrently to Logtail and Sentry if you want. But it only sends error and warn messages, no, error and fatal errors to Sentry. So for Sentry, you go to Sentry, projects, create a new project. It's a JavaScript Node.js project. Node Connect, Node.js, create project, take me to issues, I don't need any of that. And then if we go to projects, to our project settings, and we have the client keys, we need that one, the DSN, and we add that to our env. Save that, restart the application, generate a few errors, and now inside of Sentry we can go to issues, and that can take a moment, has some delay sometimes, but it will send all the errors here. Here's my error. And it has all the data included as well, and the full flow that happened before in the same process. So very helpful. Yeah, as mentioned, it's fully async, and thereby it's very fast. It's also easy to integrate with other extensions. In case any other extension developer wants to use it, I will use it for all the extensions I develop from now, so it will basically become a dependency. Another thing we have for file logging is log rotation. So if you have a node project, you go to schedule, and you don't want to fill up your server with log files, right? So let's call that log cleanup, and I want that to happen daily, once every day at midnight, and it should clean my logs, clean old logs. You can say I want to keep logs for 7 days, and that's it. Now you're set. So every 24 hours this will run, will check if there are logs older than 7 days, and will delete them. Another thing I want to show is we have included HTTP logging for express requests. So basically just copy the files from GitHub. It's a middleware, so we need to restart Wappler. It did it itself already. And now if we send a request, the request gets logged inside here. Request completed, how long it took, the host, and all the information that Express gives us. And that happens for every single request, and that includes errors. So if someone sends a request to your website, to an API request, for example, or front end, and it errors out, then you will get logs for that as well. And that basically covers the extension. As mentioned, I will add the GitHub repo to the description. Let me know if you have any questions in the comments or on GitHub or in the Wappler community. And yeah, I hope it helps you guys to do some better logging with Wappler.